afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host Imperial Dane, Master of Instruction. We're over here to look at the US M4A3 Sherman medium tank, the medium tank of the Americans, their standard bit of armor, if you will. It's a unique piece of armor, in fact, in several regards. It comes out of 340 manpower and 110 fuel, placing it between a T-34-76 and a Panzer IV, sort of roughly in cost. It's got access to a 50 caliber upgrade for 70 munitions, which makes it reasonably lethal versus infantry, but of course its sort of bigger draw comes down to actually three things. One is, of course, it's just like any other American vehicle, it uses cruise, which also means if you're playing things correctly, it doesn't quite seem like the case is here. You can, for example, have a more experienced crew you previously had in the fight, be used to sort of exchange this and immediately sort of quickly veterancy it up. So for example, say you have an M20 that did extremely well, you get out an M4 Sherman, you shift the crews out, and all of a sudden you might have veterans 1 or 2 Sherman, all of a sudden getting more bonuses. And of course in bonuses there's also something a bit unique there. It gave, for example, a thing actually a veterans don't always sort of at least a common bonus as other tanks are nearby. For example, Veteran 2 sees more accuracy in the, well, better mobility, and Veteran 3 of course more accuracy and a higher rate of fire. Overall it sort of becomes more lethal that way, in particular if other tanks are nearby, so in that regard, it becomes a bit interesting. But of course that's just all of it. Again, the crews, that's not everything. There's also the ability to actually switch the shots being fired by the main gun. Now this is an extremely unique ability, and personally one I'd like to see extended to a few more units in the game. But basically ensures, depending on what you're fighting, you can sort of switch over to something that benefits that. Fighting versus infantry, switch over to high explosive rounds. Need to deal with armor, switch over to armor piercing rounds. Note though, armor piercing rounds not that effective versus infantry. High explosive rounds pretty shite against most of the armor. Even light armor will generally deflect the high explosive rounds. So keep that in mind while using the Sherman there. Another ability is, it's actually starting out with the smoke screen ability. And here's the thing though, it can actually fire while it's still moving. So that's also a little detail. Otherwise, it fires 3 rounds and, well, it allows you to actually use smoke a bit more aggressively. You can use to lay down the smoke to cover your advance, or, cover other units, or for that matter, retreat behind. So in that regard, it's a pretty potent ability. That overall makes the Sherman tank a pretty flexible piece of armor. Overall, it doesn't really perform, say, massively different otherwise. It's better than, say, a T-34, but not particularly better than a Panzer IV. In fact, it probably ranks a bit lower. But again, unlike a Panzer IV, it can much easier switch to sort of what you want to deal with. It can perform better versus infantry than a Panzer IV. It wants to perform reasonably well versus some. At the same time, a Panzer IV doesn't quite have the same luxury, nor does it have access to smoke. And of course, there's also the veterancy ability. In that regard, it does have several small benefits for the clever user. The Sherman can be a deadly piece of armor, and it's also cheaper than your typical German piece of armor. That's also a little something there to keep in mind as the Americans. You get a lot more fun out of your Shermans that way. Otherwise it's got about the same health as any other medium tank, which of course means you can basically only withstand about 4 shots from any anti-tank gun before it cooks up. But if you generally keep that in mind, all those little things, you'll generally perform well with these Shermans. And again, a lot of players of the more novice kind, even some experienced players, tend to sort of ignore the ability to switch the shots on the main gun, but really it's sort of one of the highlights of, because again, it can allow it to sort of more effectively decimate enemy infantry, of course. It becomes, well, more accurate, but also just gains a better splash damage versus infantry that way. But again, you can still switch over and sort of deal with armor quite handily. It's not exactly a bad little piece of medium armor. And again, that's also something a lot of people tend to ignore. But again, say again you have a more experienced crew before, pop it in instead, and all of a sudden, oh good lord, I've got a veterancy 2 or 3 Sherman almost ready there, and then you can sort of get further in, and so that way quickly turn an early game advantage to sort of medium to late game advantage as well. That is really one of those sort of more special things about the Americans that tends to be forgotten. And of course the smoke as well, great for using, in many possible ways it's basically a mini smoke mortar, but on a tank. So again, use it to cover any advance or retreat, or just, to be annoying to your opponent overall. I mean, he can do a lot. And also, don't forget, you know, to upgrade there with a 50 caliber note here. I mean, up north we've got a Sherman dealing here. Armor-piercing rounds, not necessarily that effective compared to the high explosive rounds, but not half bad either. They're not excellent, so I mean, in that regard, I mean, that I suppose can also be a bit of the weakness of it. I mean, you have to switch to sort of, you know, be able to properly deal with whatever effect your opponent is dealing at you. I mean, if you're firing high armor-piercing rounds at the enemy infantry, you won't do well. Vice versa. So I mean, it does require a bit more sort of management in that regard, but not necessarily too much either. Again, you do have to be a bit aware of abilities to sort of be getting the most out of it. But overall, I mean, it's still a pretty potent and not exactly half that piece of machinery. And of course, I mean, the same other crew bonus, like for example being quickly repaired, also applies to the Sherman. So that's not half bad either. And right here, of course, he could have popped some smoke maybe earlier to cover up and retreat, but there we go, too late.
We just lost a medium tank.
And of course, a bunch of some of those bonuses actually apply if you capture it. So for example, if you capture it as a German, you can also switch over between high explosive and armor-piercing rounds there. Crew bits, not so much, but otherwise, I mean, again, a lot of neat little abilities there to keep in mind as any Sherman user. And that also pretty much sort of exemplifies its strengths and the weaknesses. I mean, really, it is all about, you know, the smoke, the high explosive armor-piercing rounds, and maybe also a bit the crews if you're Americans. So keep that in mind while utilizing this Sherman. Keep that in mind. Use it to sort of work together with other pieces of armor. For example, I mean, if you have a tank destroyer, use it in front of the tank destroyer to soak up damage, but otherwise you can also cover retreats. Use it to support an advance, not just, of course, by shooting up the enemy, but also laying down smokes at critical points, for example. I mean, it really is a bit of a utility tank, if you will. So I think that sort of rather covers it as such at the moment. So hopefully people have a slightly, you know, grand idea of this Sherman, this newfangled piece of American technology. Hopefully people will be then able to sort of get more out of it, use it for greater glory for the United States, of course, also as the Germans, you know, better understand on the battlefield and how to fight against it and thus, you know, deal with it. Understand the Sherman. Do not fear the Sherman, but learn to use it for great good or blow it up for great good, depending on what side you're on. So hopefully with this, players will have a much better understanding of it, offensively and, you know, fighting against Italy. So if you enjoyed this and hopefully learned something, got a better, clear idea of the Sherman, you know, feel free to subscribe, share it with friends so they can also understand the glory of the Sherman better. Probably not with your enemies, because you don't want them to know, those bastards. And if not, well, that's quite unfortunate, isn't it? But there you go. And see you all another time. Cheers.